They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when blood forgets and water remembers? What happens when the hand that fed you becomes the hand you cannot recognize? This is not just a story about kindness. This is a story about identity, loss, and the terrifying possibility that the life you're living may not be the life you were meant to have. The wedding hall was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars from the ceiling. White roses lined every table. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. Laughter echoed off marble walls. And at the very back, half hidden behind a pillar, sat a woman no one noticed. Her wrapper was faded, washed so many times the original color had surrendered to gray. Her headscarf was tied tight, the way women do when they've learned to make themselves small. Her shoes were cracked at the toes, held together by prayer and pride. Her name was Mama Zainab. And she was the reason the groom standing at that altar was alive. But nobody knew. Not the bride, glowing in her lace gown. Not the guests, clinking champagne glasses. Not even the groom himself. He hadn't looked at her once. She didn't blame him. Shame has a way of making sons forget their mothers. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, tap the like button. You're not alone. Mama Zainab's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. These hands had kneaded dough at 4 a.m. for 23 years. These hands had scraped burnt rice from pots to save money. These hands had wiped tears from a little boy's face when his father walked out and never came back. You're too poor to dream, her husband had said that night. She was holding their 3-year-old son. He didn't even say goodbye to the child. He just left. And she raised that boy alone. Cooked. Sold food. Prayed until her knees ached. She told herself it was enough. But deep down, she knew her son carried the shame of poverty like a scar. And now, at his wedding, surrounded by wealth and status, she was just the woman at the back. The one they tolerated. The one they pitied. But there was something no one in that hall knew. Something that began long before this day. Something that would shatter everything. 20 years earlier. Behind Mama Zainab's roadside food store, near a collapsed fence covered in rust and weeds, 3 boys always waited. Not beggars. Not thieves. Just present. They were identical. Same height. Same build. Same eyes, deep and quiet, like they'd seen too much too soon. They never asked for food. They only watched. At first, she ignored them. Then one day, she couldn't. It was late afternoon. Business had been slow. She had 1 plate of jollof rice left, and she was going to take it home for her son. But when she turned around, she saw them. 3 boys sitting in silence. Hunger has a sound, you know. It's not loud. It's the absence of noise. The stillness of a body trying to conserve energy. The hollow stare that asks nothing because it expects nothing. She walked over. You hungry? They looked at each other. Then nodded. She gave them the plate. And from that day on, every evening, she fed them. 1 plate. 3 boys. Always shared equally. They never fought over it. Never complained. The tallest one would divide it into 3 portions with his fingers, carefully, like a surgeon. One day, she asked him, "Why do you share like that?" So seriously. He looked up at her with eyes older than his age. Because if one eats alone, we all die inside. That sentence stayed with her. It haunted her dreams. It followed her through every hard day, every sacrifice, every moment she thought about giving up. If someone's words ever changed your life, drop a comment with the word gratitude. Let's honor those voices. Months passed. The boys came. She fed them. They left. No names. No history. Just a quiet ritual of survival. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Business was terrible that day. She had made only enough money to buy bread. Not rice. Not beans. Just bread. When she got home, Her son was waiting. "Mama, I'm hungry." She looked at the bread. Then she thought of the boys. She tore the bread into 3 pieces, put them in a plastic bag, and walked back to the fence. They were there, as always. She handed them the bag. "This is all I have today." The tallest boy took it, looked inside, then looked at her. "You gave us your son's food?" She didn't answer. He nodded slowly. "We will remember this." That was the last time she ever saw them. The next day, they didn't come. The day after, nothing. She waited for weeks. Searched the streets. Asked neighbors. Checked hospitals. They had vanished. Like smoke. Like a dream she wasn't sure she'd ever had. Life moved on. Her son grew up. He studied hard. Got a job. Started making money. And slowly, he stopped seeing her as his mother. And started seeing her as a reminder. A reminder of hunger. Of shame. Of nights spent sleeping on a mat because they couldn't afford a bed. He never said it. But she felt it. In the way he avoided bringing friends home. In the way he sent her money but never visited. In the way he planned a wedding and invited her only because tradition demanded it. And now, here she was. Sitting at the back of his big day. Watching him smile at people who didn't know his story. She told herself she was proud. But her heart whispered something else. You gave everything. And he gave you a seat in the corner. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who forgot, leave a heart emoji. You deserve to be seen. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special surprise. The crowd clapped. The groom looked confused. Then the hall doors opened. 3 black luxury cars rolled in slowly, sleek, silent, expensive. The kind of cars that make people stop talking and start staring. The engines cut off. 3 men stepped out. Tall. Identical. Dressed in sharp suits that probably cost more than Mama Zainab made in a year. The hall buzzed with whispers. Who are they? Business partners. Sponsors. But Mama Zainab wasn't whispering. She was frozen. Because she recognized them. Not their clothes. Not their confidence. But their eyes. Those same deep, quiet eyes. The boys from the fence. One of them walked to the front of the hall. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He just raised his hand, and the room fell silent. Before this wedding continues, he said, his voice calm but sharp, there is something that must be known. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The groom stepped forward. What is this? The man reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. A brown envelope with a red seal. A DNA test. The laughter stopped. The bride's bouquet slipped from her hands. The groom's face drained of color. What are you talking about? He stammered. The man turned and looked directly at Mama Zainab. This woman, he said, pointing to her, fed us when we were starving. Gasps filled the hall. She gave us food when she had none for herself. Mama Zainab's chest tightened. And one of us. He paused. Is the biological father of the groom. The hall erupted. Shouts. Questions. Chaos. The bride screamed. The groom stumbled backward. Mama Zainab's knees buckled, and she grabbed the pillar to keep from falling. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. But deep in her chest, something twisted. A memory she had buried. A night she had tried to forget. If your heart is racing right now, comment truth. Because this is about to get deeper. The man walked toward her. His brothers followed. The crowd parted like water. When he reached her, he knelt. Mama, he said softly. Do you remember the hospital fire? Her breath caught. 26 years ago. The night you went into labor. Her hands flew to her mouth. They told you the baby didn't survive. Tears spilled down her face. But he did. The story came out in pieces. Painful. Precise. Impossible. 26 years ago, Mama Zainab had been pregnant. Her husband had just left. She went into labor alone, in a public hospital during a power outage. There was a fire. Panic. Smoke. Screaming. When she woke up, they told her the baby was gone. She mourned. She buried an empty coffin. She moved on because she had no choice. But the baby hadn't died. He had been taken. Stolen during the chaos by a nurse who sold infants to wealthy families. And the 3 boys she fed by the fence. They were triplets. Separated at birth during another hospital scandal. Raised in different orphanages. They had found each other years later through a DNA registry for displaced children. And when they searched for their mother, they found Mama Zainab. The groom she raised, her son, the one she sacrificed everything for, was not her biological child. He was the child of a woman who had died in that same fire. A woman whose baby had been swapped with hers. And the man standing before her now, the one she had fed without knowing, was her real son. The hall was silent. Not a breath. Not a movement. The groom sank into a chair, his face blank. The bride was crying. Mama Zainab stood in the center of it all, trembling. I don't understand, she whispered. The man, her son, took her hands. You fed us because you are a mother? Not because of blood. Because of love. He gestured to his brothers. We became successful. Built companies. Searched for you for years. And when we found you, his voice broke. We realized you had already raised another child. Loved him. Sacrificed for him. So we watched. We waited. We wanted to see who you really were. One of the brothers stepped forward. We funded his education secretly. Another added, we gave him business contracts without him knowing. We made sure he succeeded, the first brother said. Because you deserve to see your son thrive. Even if he wasn't ours. Mama Zainab collapsed into their arms. Not from grief. From relief. From love. From the weight of 26 years finally lifted. If you believe kindness is never wasted, hit the subscribe button. This story isn't over. The wedding didn't continue that day. The ex-husband, who had shown up to brag, collapsed outside and was rushed to the hospital. The groom sat in silence for hours, staring at the DNA results. The bride left. But Mama Zainab. She stood surrounded by her 3 sons. Her real sons. They bought her a house. A business. A life. Not because she asked. But because she had already given them everything. Weeks later, the groom came to see her. He knocked on her new door, and when she opened it, he fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I was ashamed of you. I forgot. She touched his head gently. You are still my son, she said. Blood or not. I raised you. I loved you. That will never change. And in that moment, he understood. That motherhood is not about DNA. It's about presence. It's about sacrifice. It's about feeding 3 boys by a broken fence because hunger has no name. If you stand for real love, the kind that asks for nothing, drop a like. She never asked for riches. She only shared food. And kindness returned as truth. At the loudest moment of her life. Sometimes, what you give quietly comes back loudly. Not always in the way you expect. But always in the way you need. So let me ask you this. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Would you have fed those boys? Would you have forgiven the son who ignored you? Would you have embraced the truth even when it shattered everything? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe. Because there are more stories like this, stories that remind us what it means to be human. See you in the next one. Stay kind. Stay strong. And remember, your sacrifices are never forgotten. Even when it feels like they are.